Have you ever worked on a project and felt like a colleague from another team was maybe a little too interested in what you were doing, like they were trying to get involved when it really wasn't their place?
Yeah, I think everyone has probably experienced that at some point or another.
Today, we're going to deep dive into that. We're calling it overstepping work scope boundaries.
Right, those kind of invisible lines that define who does what, like um, your responsibilities, your tasks,
Yeah.
your areas of expertise.
Exactly. It's like everyone having their own lane. And we all know what happens when somebody veers out of their lane. Things can get messy.
Mm.
So, we're going to look at why these boundary crossings occur and what the impact is for individuals, but also for the entire team.
Okay, well, let's jump in. I think it's worth pointing out that sometimes what looks like deliberate overstepping can sometimes just be someone who's really ambitious.
Oh, yeah. Just trying to get ahead.
Yeah, like they might see getting involved in projects outside of their assigned work as a way to boost their visibility, maybe gain some recognition from higher ups.
So, it's not always malicious. They just might be career focused.
Exactly. It might not even be intentional, but it does happen.
But then there are those times when you just feel like it's a free for all because nobody knows who's responsible for what.
Right, if roles and responsibilities aren't clearly defined, then those boundaries become very blurry,
Hmm.
and it's almost inevitable that people will step on each other's toes.
And sometimes it seems like the company culture itself can encourage that kind of competitive behavior.
Oh, absolutely. If a company puts too much emphasis on individual achievements and not enough on teamwork, then people are going to be more focused on getting ahead themselves
Yeah.
than helping the team succeed.
Okay, so we've talked about ambition, we've talked about unclear roles, and we've talked about a potentially competitive environment. But what's the real downside for the average worker when these boundaries get ignored? I mean, it's frustrating, but what's the big deal?
Well, the consequences can be pretty huge. For starters, it can lead to a lot of conflict and resentment among colleagues.
That makes sense. If you feel like someone's encroaching on your territory, you're not going to be too happy about it.
Right. And that leads to duplicated efforts, confusion about who's responsible for what, and ultimately a decrease in productivity.
And nobody wants that.
No. Plus, it can really hurt morale.
Yeah.
If you're constantly feeling undermined or like someone else is taking credit for your work, your job satisfaction is going to take a nosedive.
And it can damage trust within teams. If you feel like you can't rely on your colleagues to respect your boundaries, why would you want to collaborate with them?
Exactly. And in the long run, all of that can lead to stress and even burnout.
So, what can we do about it? What advice would you give someone who's dealing with a colleague overstepping their boundaries?
I think the most important thing is to make sure that everyone in the organization has a crystal clear understanding of their roles and responsibilities.
Okay, so clear job descriptions.
Yes. And open communication between teams. That can go a long way in preventing misunderstandings and conflicts.
That makes sense. Communication is key. And
Yeah.
what about leaders? What's their role in all of this?
They need to set a good example, actively address any boundary violations they see, and foster a culture that values teamwork over individual achievement.
So basically, they need to walk the walk.
Absolutely. And it can also be helpful to provide employees with training on conflict resolution.
So they have the tools to handle those tricky situations.
Yeah, exactly. I think the main takeaway here is that work scope boundary violations might seem like a small thing, but they can actually have a really big impact on individuals and on the overall health of a workplace.
Yeah, and if we can understand the causes, we can start to create a more respectful and collaborative work environment for everyone.
I agree.
So, to all our listeners out there, take a minute to think about your own workplace. Have you noticed any subtle ways in which work scope boundaries are being crossed?
Yeah, and more importantly, what steps could you or your organization take to encourage collaboration and respect for those defined roles?
Definitely something to think about.